Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on global politics. More than a week after the US midterm elections, a change of power in the House of Representatives is imminent. According to the opinion research institute Edison Research, the opposition Republicans took over the majority in the Chamber of Congress with 218 seats on Wednesday. President Joe Biden's Democrats recently came to 210 seats. 7 constituencies had not yet been fully counted. The Republican victory in California's 27th congressional district brought the party across the finish line. With a majority in the House of Representatives, the Republicans can make governing significantly more difficult for President Biden in the next 2 years until the next election in 2024. While the loss robs Biden of some of his power in Washington, he has signaled that he expects cooperation from Republicans. The American people have made it clear that they expect Republicans to be willing to work with me. That is what he said last week, shortly after the election. After announcing the result, Biden congratulated House Republican Chairman Kevin McCarthy on the likely majority and said he was ready to work with Republicans to make a difference for US citizens. The American people want us to do things, said a statement released by the US President's office. I will work with anyone, Republican or Democrat, who is willing to work with me to achieve results for Americans, he said. McCarthy gained his parliamentary group's support on Tuesday to run for the powerful post as chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives, succeeding Democrat Nancy Pelosi. Such an outcome had been predicted, although the Republican majority will end up being far narrower than expected. And in the important Senate, the Democrats are still in charge. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives and about a third of the seats in the Senate were up for grabs in the midterm elections in the middle of Biden's term on Tuesday last week. In addition, the important governorships were filled in numerous states. The counting of the votes in several races took a long time due to very close results and electoral peculiarities in some states. In the midterm elections in the middle of a US president's term in office, his party usually gets, let's say, a reminder. The president himself is not up for election, but the vote is considered a kind of referendum on his policies. In terms of domestic policy, Biden had recently added to inflation in the country. Among other things, rising fuel prices in particular had caused dissatisfaction. And even before that, Biden had to struggle with dramatically poor poll numbers. Nevertheless, the narrow result for the Republicans is disappointing. Pre-election polls had predicted a landslide victory for the Republicans, at least in the House of Representatives, and they were also considered favorites in the race for the Senate. All over the world, honorary consuls are said to be involved in crimes for abuse of office. This is the result of international research entitled #Shadow Diplomats, involving almost 60 media from 45 countries, including several German TV stations and newspapers. Accordingly, convicted drug smugglers, arms dealers, murderers, or sex offenders are said to have worked as honorary consuls in the past. Honorary consuls are usually people working in their home country who are appointed by other countries because regular diplomatic representation is too expensive. The consuls are then supposed to represent the interests of another country in their homeland. Although they do not receive any money for this, they still enjoy immunity. As a result, they have special freedom to travel and do not have to have their luggage checked at airports. According to the research, more than 500 of the world's amateur diplomats are involved in scandals or investigations, and 57 of them were convicted during their tenure. An Italian honorary consul is said to have been sentenced to around 15 years in prison for illegally smuggling more than 22,000 ancient objects out of Egypt. And 25 German diplomats should also appear in the report. Among them is said to be Peter Mossack, who is being investigated on suspicion of tax evasion. Mossack's brother ran the law firm Mossack Fonseca in Panama, which is said to have been responsible for the creation of numerous shell companies. The machinations of the law firm became public in 2016 through a large data leak, which also was published by numerous media worldwide as the so-called Panama Papers. Another mysterious death has occurred in the Russian military. A naval college colonel was found in his office with gunshot wounds. The deputy head of a Russian naval training center in Vladivostok, Vadim Boyko, has been found dead. According to the Russian telegram channel Far East Vedomosti, the colonel shot himself. It will cite official statements from the Russian Pacific Fleet. Boyko was one of the deputy heads of the renowned Pacific Marine School, where he was responsible for technical support, among other things. He is also said to have worked with the recruits. But what local media call suicide raises questions about others. Russian independent news website Meduza.io reports that 5 shell casings and 4 pistols were found next to the victim. The Russian telegram channel Baza reports, referring to the authorities' investigations, that several shots were heard. A soldier on duty then found the colonel dead. The colonel must have shot himself 5 times in the chest, says Baza on the different statements. And no suicide note was found either. Another lieutenant colonel had been found dead hanging over a fence in the same region just a month earlier. Roman Malik was also officially said to have committed suicide, but the soldier's family ruled it out. He was responsible for new recruits from the region. Strange deaths keep happening among Russia's elite. In September, the former head of the Moscow Institute of Aviation, Anatoly Gerashenko, reportedly fell to his death. Several business bosses also died mysteriously, according to Lukoil company manager Ravil Maganov. He allegedly fell out of a 6th floor window after being treated at the hospital. And now we come to the orange one. Former US President Donald Trump wants to run again for the Republicans in the 2024 presidential election. To make America great and glorious again, tonight I announce my candidacy for President of the United States. That's what he told cheering supporters at his luxury Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida on Tuesday. The Republican praised achievements during his 2017 to 21 tenure and lamented that the country has gone downhill steeply since Biden took office. America's comeback is starting right now. 2 years ago, we were a great nation, and soon we will be a great nation again. That's what he said. Trump lost the 2020 election to Democrat Joe Biden and left the White House after 1 term. To this day, Trump has not admitted his electoral defeat. A few minutes before the speech began, it became known that his advisors had submitted documents to the US Election Commission to create a committee called Donald J. Trump for President 2024. His announcement comes just a week after the general and gubernatorial elections in the US, in which the Republicans, contrary to expectations, did not achieve a spectacular victory. Trump, who loudly interfered in the election campaign and publicly supported numerous right-wing candidates, is held responsible for the poor result. That could now complicate his project, because in the end, in order to actually run as his party's official candidate for the 2024 presidential election, Trump has to assert himself in internal party primaries. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, for example, could become a threat to Trump, because DeSantis was confirmed in office with a strong result in the midterm elections. Although DeSantis represents similar hardline positions, he appears less shrill in its public image, and other Republicans should now feel encouraged to step out of cover as well. Trump's Vice President Mike Pence distanced himself from him and said that he was considering running for office and would then be prepared to run against his former boss. From the more moderate corner of the party, the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, could bring himself into play as a candidate as well. Trump, as I said, was president of the United States from 2017 to 2021. In the United States, a person can serve 2 terms of office, whether consecutive or not. Trump would be 78 years old when elected in just over 2 years. And to this day, as I said, Trump refuses to admit defeat to Biden in the 2020 presidential election. He claims to have been deprived of victory by massive electoral fraud, but has never produced any evidence. At the time, Biden had 81 million votes and a clear majority of voters from the states. More than 74 million Americans voted for Trump at the time. Biden finally replaced Trump in the White House on January 20th in 2021. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov left the G20 summit before the end of the meeting and the official adoption of the final declaration. The plane with a Russian delegation left the Indonesian island of Bali in the evening on Wednesday. The meeting of the 20 leading economies and emerging markets ended on Wednesday. No, he left Tuesday and the end is Wednesday. Lavrov represented Russian President Vladimir Putin, who, according to the Kremlin, was unable to come to Bali due to time constraints. The Russian chief diplomat held numerous talks and attended meetings on Tuesday. He also said that the final statement is practically ready. Lavrov said it contained the Western and Russian perspectives on the war in Ukraine. And according to information from Russian state television, the minister's departure had already been planned for Tuesday evening all the time. A reason was not given, and according to media reports, he had previously been examined twice in hospital for an undiagnosed illness. However, Lavrov denied this in a video. But you know the denials from there. Russia was diplomatically isolated at the summit. A draft for the joint final declaration of the participating states presented on Tuesday stated that the war in Ukraine had negatively affected the world economy and that the threat of the use of nuclear weapons was inadmissible. The draft of the final declaration also spoke of a war in Ukraine. Russia fundamentally rejects this choice of words and has made its use a punishable offense in its own country. Apparently, at Lavrov's urging, the wording was incorporated into the draft that there were differing views and different assessments of the Ukraine conflict. The draft had to be approved by the heads of state and government on Wednesday. Before his departure on Tuesday, Lavrov said that all the problems with regard to any peace negotiations were on the Ukrainian side. They reject negotiations categorically and set obviously unrealistic conditions. The Kremlin wants to see concrete evidence that the West is seriously interested in disciplining Volodymyr Zelensky and explaining to him that this cannot continue, that it is not in the interests of the Ukrainian people. That's what Lavrov said. The Ukrainian president has rejected peace talks with Moscow as long as Putin is in power. Zelensky said in a video message that now is the time to stop the destructive Russian war. This will save thousands of lives. He also called for an extension of the grain agreement. The agreement, negotiated with the mediation of the United Nations and Turkey on the safe export of Ukrainian grain through a protective corridor in the Black Sea, expires on Saturday. Israel blamed Iran for the attack on a fuel tanker off the coast of Oman. The attack was carried out using drones. That's what an Israeli official who asked to remain anonymous told the AFP news agency on Wednesday. The drones are comparable to those that Iran sells to Russia for the use in Ukraine. The official spoke of an Iranian provocation. The incident is set to disrupt the World Cup, which begins in Qatar on Sunday. Eastern Pacific Shipping, owned by Israeli billionaire Idan Ofer, said the ship it operates was hit with a projectile off the coast of the Arab Sultanate on Tuesday. There were no injuries or leaks, and the hull of the ship suffered minor damage. The tanker left Oman on Monday and is to bring gas oil to the Argentine capital Buenos Aires for further processing. The Gulf of Oman connects to the Persian Gulf, and the most important shipping routes for the world oil supply pass through these seas. Iran and Israel are enemies. Recently, there had been repeated attacks on ships on both sides, for which Tehran and Jerusalem blamed each other. An oil tanker was attacked off the coast of Oman last year as well. A Romanian and a British crew member were killed. Shortly before the explosions on the Baltic Sea pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2, two so-called dark ships apparently crossed the area. This was reported by the US computer magazine Wired and refers to analyses by the company SpaceNow. The data specialists have therefore identified two large ships on satellite images that appeared near the gas leaks before the detonations, with direction-finding transmitters switched off. And according to the analyses, there are those two ships, each about 95 to 130 meters long, which passed the leaks a few miles apart. They had their signals turned off, meaning there was no information about their movement, and they were trying to hide their location information and general information from the world. That's what SpaceNow CEO Jerry Javonicki explained. So-called dark ships are ships that have switched off their tracking system and thus disappear from radar screens. According to international law, large ships are obliged to transmit their location information via a transponder in an automated process. This should make navigation easier for other ships and prevent possible collisions. The analysis that has now been published is likely to fuel speculation about the cause of the gas leaks. To track down the ships, SpaceNow says it examined 90 days of archived satellite imagery surrounding the explosions. With the help of a machine learning, 25 objects were finally discovered that crossed the sea area during this time. The direction-finding transmitter was switched off on just two of those ships. The data analyst said they shared the unusual finding with NATO officials, and according to the report, it is relatively rare for ships to switch off their transponders and, kind of submerge. Nevertheless, the positioning systems could be disrupted under certain circumstances. For example, in connection with, certain weather conditions. The investigations into the gas leaks on the two Baltic Sea pipelines are ongoing, though. According to the authorities, a total of 4 underwater leaks were found in the pipes at the end of September, from which enormous amounts of gas escaped for days. The European Union and NATO assume an act of sabotage, and the Kremlin had rejected speculation about Russian involvement, of course. And that concludes today's magazine, or this week's magazine. I hope to see you here again next week, of course. But in the meantime, have a look in the video description. There are all the schedules for all the other channels, so you can see me every day if you want. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.